You should be seeing Prepare Your Compost for Winter. My name is Susan Schuler. I'm actually with Recycling Connections. We contract with the Marathon County, we're contracted with Marathon County Solid Waste Department to offer education and outreach for the community. This presentation is going to talk about what happens in this scenario when the snow is covering our compost and decomposition kind of comes to a halt. How do we make sure we're still diverting food waste? So we're going to cover that today. So saving your food year round. I have just a little question for folks. If you want to give yourself, give me an idea of maybe how much you compost. So using the chat box, if you could write in on a scale 1 to 5, 5 being I am an expert composter, I'm really good with this stuff, or 1, I've never composted before, and I'm, so giving me an idea of where you're at, or 3, like you compost, but maybe not manage it all that much, is kind of in the 3 area. So Sue, I see you're at a 2, Annie's a 3, Nicole 4, Brittany 3, Wendy 3, Stephanie 4, Donna 3, Susan 2, Susan H 4, Sandy a 3, Ashley 3ish, Lynn 5. Okay, that gives me a good sense. So there are at least some of the basics, and which is really good, because today what you can expect for the presentation is we're not going to be going into how to compost, the basics of that. That is not going to be this presentation. We're going to be really talking about how to prepare our compost for winter. So there's going to be a little basics, but if you want more extended details on how to start backyard composting, we do have resources on our website that shows that. So you just can definitely go there to get started. So Shraddha, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but I see that you have none, so there might be additional resources after this presentation. You might want to go to Recycling Connections or Marathon County Solid Waste Department and download some of those worksheets we have, or tips to get started. I have a video that shows us how to get started for composting that goes a little bit more into what you'd want to see if you're going to actually start composting for the first time. But this slide is really important to first start off showing the USDA, and USDA came out with a goal by 2030. They want to reduce the US food waste going to landfill by 50%. They want to divert our food waste out of landfills of being common practice to actually getting them into other sources. So source reduction from the beginning, getting more food rescue programs happening. So if we have good, viable food that isn't really bad, but it's not going to be used, can we get it quickly to other people that could utilize it? Could we feed it to livestock that we can use for offsetting sort of that to get it into animals and feed animals? And if not, how do we home compost it? So really encouraging people to start home composting if they're not already, or increase their home composting at home. And then as you go down with this pyramid, as it's showing, small scale composting starting to pick up a little bit more. You might have noticed more community plots for bringing your compost. Some communities have them, some don't. Medium scale, that is maybe some of your compost picker haulers. So some communities are starting a business where there's a hauler who will take the compost to maybe an organic farm, or someone who will manage that and turn it into soil amendment and manage that for use. But finally getting down to landfill. So the Institute for Local Self-Reliance came up with this guideline hierarchy to help us look at ways we can reduce our food waste overall and grow our community. So for this, I have on bullet points just several reasons why people start composting. And your reason for composting will determine how you manage your compost. So you want to do some thinking on that. Are you really going to use the finished product, or are you using it because you want to divert food waste, knowing that putting it in the landfill, it doesn't really break down? So giving it a chance for actually it decomposing and going back into the soil and into the earth, things like that. So some things to think about of how you get compost. That's going to be important for you to determine those composting itself. One other thing in the chat I wouldn't mind you putting is maybe your town or community that you're from. For the most part, I think you're all in Wisconsin, but now that we're doing web programs, people can connect from all over the place. So I would love if you would use the chat box and just put your community that you're coming in from. Okay. Thanks. We've got Milwaukee, a couple in Stevens Point, Cronin, Wetter, Wausau, Hortonville, New Hope, Portage, Amherst. Okay. Solon Springs, Wisconsin. Thank you. That is helping me, and also interesting where everyone is coming in from. Great. So even though we're in, this is from Marathon County Solid Waste Department, obviously the information is going to be the same as well, because so far it seems like everyone's from Wisconsin itself. So we're dealing with the cold. To follow up with that last slide of why you compost, the other key piece you'll want to do is figure out how much waste is going into, food waste is going to be converted into your home composter. For winter months, this is important because if you're in a large family and you do have a lot of compost that you generate, if you're in the average that's higher end for the average of that average household at 83 pounds per household, that's going to be a different management you need to prepare for winter, as opposed to the household that's maybe 1 or 2 people. You're producing about 23 pounds of food waste a month. That's going to be a different kind of management that you need to go into. What do I need to do for the fall to be prepared to continue this process through winter? So I encourage you to kind of get an estimate, a rough estimate about how much weight of material you're producing during on an average week. And so this picture is actually from a waste audit. Obviously in that bin is not organics, but we were measuring organics, recyclables, and trash that was going into the, coming out of a school. But you can use a scale at home to measure that, whatever you could do. But if you can get an idea, that's gonna help you on your first steps for composting throughout winter. Again, this study was from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. That's a really great resource that I have in this slide for how to get started with home compost, and they have a lot of good resources online. All right, so I'm just backing up a little bit. Something to be very clear about: compost is not dirt. Compost is not soil. It's soil amendment. It's increasing the fertility of your soil to allow soil to gather and hold moisture a little bit more, gives more structure to it. It adds nutrients into your soil, so it's going to be richer for wherever you put it. If you're going to put it on your garden, if you're going to put it in a prairie, if you're going to put it in house plants, however you end up using that finished product, if you use the finished product. But for the most part, it's for a soil amendment. So the process of actually composting is what we're doing at home is trying to mimic nature's process of decomposition. We're adding materials in, and we want to get out this great soil amendment. What you put into it is very important, and it requires a balance. So here we have example of grass clippings, food scraps, and leaves. A blend of material is going to be important for you to be adding. So just keep that in mind. What you're actually trying to keep happy are these guys. These microorganisms are the ones that actually do the work for us. And so they are the ones that are going to break down the material so it can be then usable in your garden. If you think about your compost having all of these living things in it, you're going to think about what do they need to survive? What organisms, microorganisms need to to survive is the same thing you need to survive. They'll need water, oxygen, food, in a home or a compost bin, or a compost pile, really. For the purpose of this presentation, we're really not going to talk too much about water and oxygen optimum levels you need for a compost. Pretty much because during winter, these workhorses are going into the earth, they're going into the ground, they're not actually going to be doing a lot of decomposition for us, because in winter, decomposition slows dramatically or comes to a stop due to the cold weather and temperatures in the freezing ground. So for the most part, if you want more information on how to compost, those are key pieces for the spring and summer that we're not going to get into in this presentation. We're going to be talking about what food we put into the compost bin even during the winters and how we manage that, and then creating that space for them that's going to hold all the material we need to add. So talking about food, when I talk about feeding our organisms, we're adding nitrogen into it. The nitrogen, or the green material, is where all your food scraps fall in. So that's nitrogen. Those are the greens that are going to break down. We really won't have leaves. You really won't have too much grass going in, or that fresh grass. But you might be cleaning out your garden that has a lot of greeny material. So if it's more or less, if it's green, then it tends to be more of the nitrogen side of things. But it's very important to balance your greens with your browns. So you do want nitrogen in it, and that's all great. But if we only put food scraps all winter long into our compost bin, you could potentially have some problems come spring with smell and just the imbalance of materials that are in your compost bin that could be problematic. So you need to be thinking about your browns that you're going to be adding. The more or less the message here is save your leaves. I'm going to show you a little bit how I save my leaves and some images of that. But right now is key. Talk to neighbors if you can get some of their bags of leaves. That's wonderful. You can also use straw. Can use hay as well. Hay does have some seeds in it that are maybe less desirable in a compost bin. You'll get more weedy material out of that when you use it on your garden. But hay is a little bit better for that. Sometimes it's a little more expensive by a couple dollars, but might be worth it for you. Then things not to put in the compost. Same thing you would do in the summer and the spring. What you don't put in it, you don't put it in the winter too. The winter, try to avoid lots of meats, bones, fats, dairies, and oils. All of those items will attract more of your varmints and might not be as great to add during that time. You want to have things that are no more than like a finger width apart. Otherwise, they're just really not going to break down. Even in optimum composting conditions, large branches and logs just don't really break down great. I do not put a dog or cat waste in. Definitely, I don't put human waste in. I do have a dog. What I've been doing is digging a hole, and I just put my dog waste in the hole, and then I cover it up when it kind of gets full. It really doesn't go in my compost. Mostly that is because I'm using my compost for gardening purposes. So it's going back onto a food plot. If I was only going to use it on my prairie garden, it really wouldn't make a difference. If I'm going to use it just on plants that I'm never really going to harvest to eat and it's never going to be ingested, then you can put your dog waste in there, cat waste. If you're using a non-natural or a clay-based kitty litter, then you don't want to put it in your compost either. But if you go to a natural kitty litter, there are some that are compostable in your backyard compost now. So something to think about if you have a cat. Charcoal and treated wood are two different items that have chemicals in them that are not good for a compost. So if you do a lot of charcoal grilling in your backyard, a lot of that charcoal has added lighter fluid to it, and those chemicals just never really, they don't fully burn out. You'd be adding some toxic chemicals to your compost bin. You don't want to really do that. Treated wood too. people are encouraged to not use treated wood for building a compost bin. I know it breaks down after 5 years or 6 years. I might have to replace some of those wood pieces, but it's better than using the treated wood as a general rule. Some people do use treated wood too. Again, it comes down to what's your purpose for composting? Where are you going to use that final soil amendment if you are? And that makes all the difference. Persistent weeds, I also do not, when I'm cleaning out my gardens right now, and some of those weeds just are full of seeds, and I'll actually throw those in the landfill. I'll put them in the trash. You are able to do that. You're not asked to put all of your cleaning out of your garden into your dumpster, but you are allowed to put those really weedy weeds that have persistent tendencies on there. So, and yeah, don't compost your kids. Although my kids love to play in the compost. All right, so let's look at sort of, I'm gonna have a break here. I'm seeing there's some possible questions here. Which one is better, straw or hay? Oh, somebody says hay. Straw is pretty fibrous. It also is a little harder to break down. That's true. While hay will break down faster, so it may contain more seeds, as Susan mentioned. So there you go. Straw or hay debate. Both are your brown material, period. Both can be used in your compost system. So it does, maybe it's really what you have available where it comes down to. Are compostable bag liners safe to put into a compost pile? For the most part, compostable bag liners are not necessarily recommended for backyard composting. Compost bag liners might break down a little bit better in a more larger middle scale compost system. For your backyard pile, I would say try it, but if you're going to start putting a lot of compost bag liners into your bin, they're going to take a while to break down. And I wouldn't recommend putting a bunch in. If you wanted to experiment, I often do that. When the Sun Ships came out with the compostable bag, I just had to try it and see if it composts in my backyard bin, and no, it might be compostable, but not in the backyard setup. So you need to really watch those things on products that say they're compostable. They're not referring to a backyard compost bin. So a word of caution on that one. I wouldn't put a compostable bag liner in my backyard compost. It's unlikely that it will break down. If somebody has experience with that, can feel free to use the chat to share if they've said, well, one certain bag liner works really well to break down in your backyard bin. Go ahead, but as I keep them out, I don't use them. Compostable wipes. Again, you want to look at the product that you're using on those compostable wipes. Are there added things to it that only a larger scale composter can actually get it to break down? In your backyard compost, I mean, remember, we're even going into freezing season. So if you add all these compostable wipes all through winter and they're more than just fibrous, more than just a paper product, then you're going to have problems with it breaking down. So not knowing the actual product you're using for the compostable wipes, it's hard for me to say what the condition. I would look at what is that compostable wipe made of? And you have to be very careful because a lot of times these companies are not talking about backyard compost systems. Okay, so thanks for those questions. Those are great. So going into backyard composting, getting ready for the winter, I highly recommend you have a 2-bin system as a minimum. So you can see in this picture, I have my bin here, my 2 bins, but I have a whole pile sitting back here. This is what I added to. We're going to show some videos in a minute. And here's the way I collect some brown material. So another look at that just to get us started. Of what I came into the fall with.
Good morning, welcome to my garden. This morning I'm moving my compost, so today I get to take the fresh soil amendment and put it right onto my garden. It's early September and I'm getting ready to prepare for the winter. So here we go.
So you can see this big pile right here. It's nice, it's dark. This material has little to no seeds in it. It's been curing, they call it, the final process of a compost pile before you actually utilize it on your garden. Here's another look at it here. You can see that there's still some larger sticks in there. I might pull those out and put it in the bin for further composting. But compost, finished compost sometimes does have larger pieces. That's the structure of it. That's going to be allowing some kind of mulch activity to allow water holding capacity in your soil, and then all those great nutrients. Look how dark that is, and beautiful kind of crumbly and mulchy looking material. So I'm pretty excited about this. I finished this product. All of this soil went on to a new prairie plot that I prepared. I had tarped this area and trying to kill off all of the weeds that I had in the section that I didn't want. A lot of stinging nettle, raspberries, and goldenrod. So those were 3 species, and it had nothing else in this whole section of my backyard. So I'm trying to diversify my backyard, bringing in some prairie plants. I had some plants I grew myself, so that bottom picture here is what I actually planted right into the compost layer. So this compost layer is about 2 inches, sometimes 3 in some areas, and then I'm able to plant right into it for the fall planting. I'm getting it ready. This would be the same thing if I was putting this on my food garden plot. I could have taken this soil amendment and put it right onto my food garden, getting ready for the spring, and it could sit there all winter. No problem. But more or less, I needed to get this stuff out of the area so I could make room for my emptying my 2 bins that were completely full, that needed to be cleaned out before winter, because I would have run out of space for diverting my food scraps into. So here I'm emptying my bins as the next step. And I use bins that are available from the Marathon County Solid Waste Department. And for those who are in Point, Recycling Connections always also sells these. Although, Karen, I think we're out of them. Or do we have 1 or 2 left in the office? But these are bins we really recommend. They come apart very nicely, easy to use. I'm not straining my back trying to lift the whole bin up at one time to get to the material. Because I need to get to this whole bin of material, and I'm going to put it into a big old pile that's just gonna sit all winter long and into spring. So if you can see how that bin is now kind of some clips pulled apart and then 2 pieces. And here's another look at that of how we're pulling that apart. You can see that mound of material. Then I start layering it. So I did move it. I added some chicken manure and bedding to it. That's the layering I'm doing at this point. I have straw, and I'm layering it with some manure and bedding from my chicken coop. And that bin you saw that I just took apart. So those are the 3 components that are in there layered up. So maybe it didn't look very much like a lasagna, nice layering. I'm more or less making a heap. Because it's early September when I did this, I realized that there's gonna be some decomposition that still takes place, knowing that we have another, 5 weeks or so of pretty good weather conditions for breaking materials down. It was really dry when I moved my bin, so I was thinking about how am I going to bring some microorganisms in to do some work for me in the next 5 weeks. I watered it to give some more moisture to them so they can still do some decomposition before we go into winter. Now that was just 1 bin. I'm going to be adding my 2nd bin to it in this next video here.
I'm in the middle of changing my compost bins, getting them ready for winter. What I first do is empty my 2 black compost bins and I combine them into a large pile. This, you could see my pizza boxes are in there, eggshells, kind of the raw materials still. Those will all get broken down. They're going to have a good 6 months or more of sitting. And then I have the compost bin. This compost bin has been emptied. This is where I'm adding fresh material for the fall. All my fresh materials will go down into there. And then I have 2 kind of wire cages. These are going to be filled with leaves, and this is how I collect my leaves for the winter. And then I have a second bin. This is going to be assembled, and it's going to be completely empty as I go into winter. And during winter, I'll have 1 full bin that can collect material all winter long. It won't break down very much, but it's an empty bin, and it's plenty of capacity for doing what I need. I'm in the...
Okay, and so then in the end, this is more or less what my setup is looking like as we go into the winter months. I've got a quarter filled, a third of the way filled now that it's mid-October of this bin here. And all through the winter, or all through the fall, I'll continue to add to that as it gets full. We've already started adding leaves into our wire bins. If you go to the hardware store, if you go to stores, you can make these however you want. You can do chicken wire. I'm just using materials that I have in my yard. So yes, you can make it look a little bit more tidy, but this really works well for me. I wanted to have this bin that's completely empty, as you can see from the picture above. It's completely empty, and it's the closest one to my house where I'm going to be needing to access my bin. So I also wanted to plan ahead so I didn't have this empty bin at the far edge of my yard or this space here. So I wanted to make sure that it's closest access. Our fence line this is part of our yard on both sides. We have a fence line that kind of divides our lot. And so this is not my neighbor's yard. And I think that's also important to mention that I'm not right up against my neighbor here. This is my yard on both sides. So important to note, because if you are really close to neighbors, you just want to keep a little bit more space than perhaps it looks like in my image here. If that was a neighbor's property, then I actually would want to have my compost bins maybe a little bit more gap from the fence line. So important to note. The other thing, what I do in the winter is I create a path to my compost bin. So to this bin itself, there'll be a path. I use snowshoes to build, to create a trail. My husband will sometimes shovel it, but shoveling over a lawn is not always the best unless you get a lot of snow, then it really doesn't matter. Snowshoes work great. It just packs down a path for me. And so I'm not getting in too deep of snow to get out there. And so when you're going into this, and then I wanted to just share a few more structures for this. So that was my system. It works for me. It works great. A lot of people use 3-bin systems, and those are really great as well. You see there's not really a lid on top, so you have to think about that, of being really adamant about layering your materials. So every time you add food scraps, you're putting a brown layer on top. You're taking a big bunch of leaves and you're sprinkling those on top. Or the straw or the hay, whichever you're using for the browns. But it's so important to have that, especially with the 3-bin system, so you're not bringing in unwanted critters perhaps to your bin. But these work great. Here's one with just some pallets they created. Very common to see in backyard composting to do this kind of setup. And it works really, really, really great. Some wire composting, so you can do that. Adds a lot of air flow in here, but you also have to sometimes add some water to that in the summer months when it's hot. And this beautiful structure, really giving a prize to these compost bins is Karen's backyard. So give a shout out to Karen for this one. Karen Sig, who's helping us as a co-host today. She has 4 of the bin systems and she just rotates them through. And then she has a really nice, I think it's a geo bin, isn't it, Karen? That's in the back here.
Yeah, I unmuted myself for this.
Go for it.
Yeah, actually at this point in time, this was just taken this fall. The 3, that geo bin on the far left, 2 of the others are completely empty now.
Okay.
And ready for adding our leaves and, other things for this, fall. The one with, you can see maybe a little yellow thing on top. That is a little yellow hand claw that always identifies which is my current active bin that I put material in. And I still have some on the far right bin, some material that is curing that I need to, I can still get rid of this, or, move this fall. But I always tell my husband, whatever one has that claw on the top is the more active one to put stuff in. But anyway, so I use the kind of same system as Susan's been describing, but just using all these bins.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about that lasagna layering. It's just a good metaphor for thinking about your compost bin. It's really easy in winter just to be adding all of this food waste, but not thinking or remembering to put on that brown layer. Do remember to put a brown layer on. And that's taking a chunk. And yes, your leaves might be somewhat frozen, but they do break apart quite good, especially if you have a lid on it. I can chip them out of those wire bins really easily in the winter, and I'll just take a chunk and I'll just make sure that's on top of my food that I just added. But always remember to cover it up, and that's why you're keeping those leaves through winter. In the middle of winter, I have had to buy a bale of hay or straw. And at that time, it's hard to get them on access. Now is a great time to get a bale of straw or hay to be prepared for winter. So if you happen to run out of leaves, you do have a backup there of material. Troubleshooting for some of those animals. Animals are also getting a little hungry in the winter. Some of them are hibernating, so you don't have to worry about it. So just keep that reminder that they are going to be most attracted to meat scraps or fatty foods. And so if you keep that out of your bin, you're most likely not going to have any of these guys. I do get voles in my compost bin that I don't mind. It does not bother me to have voles in my bin, breaking down material, eating the material, even in the winter. If that bothers you, then you can just turn your bin more often. So deter them from taking up housing in your bin if that's a problem to you. And if another alternative I haven't really mentioned until now is you could always do a worm composting, a vermicompost in your house during the winter too, to continue food scrap composting. That's going to keep the decomposition process going. That's a whole other process, whole other talk. It's a form of composting using red wiggler worms in your home, if that's something that you want to try to, and you just didn't want to let things just freeze outside and you actually want to keep an active compost bin, that is also an option. Okay, so I do have to give the plug for Marathon County Solid Waste Department because they do have these bins available, and I know they have some in-house available as well until the order comes in next April. There's a few in-house for them. So these bins, why Karen and I really love them, because they're 100% made of recycled plastic. Right here in North America, in Toronto, the company's wonderful. They've got a really good sustainability record. This bin, compared to the other compost bins out there, which this one's not sold in any stores, so you can't get it from a hardware store or something like that. It tends to have a higher holding capacity than other bins do. So this one can hold, if you kind of think about 6 to 8 30-gallon bags of yard material or leaves, is kind of a way of visualizing that. And obviously it lasts long. I've had mine for 15 to 20 years. So they are really definitely lasting long. And Karen, I'm sure, has had hers for many, many years and just added them to her fleet. So over time, it comes with a compost cookbook too to help you get started with composting. With that, I want to, well, I'll just finish up these two and then I'll take some questions. But we have, this is part of an ongoing series, fall series of presentations from the Marathon County Solid Waste Department. We have another one called State of Waste. If you wanted to get an idea of what the Marathon County Solid Waste were more than a landfill. And so the previous presentation was really digging into all of the programs that are available in Marathon County Solid Waste to the residents, and a little bit more information on recycling. All of our materials do go down to the Portage County Recycling Center or the Materials Recovery Center or Recovery Facility, otherwise known as a MRF. And so both Marathon County and Portage County uses that same recycling information. So we share materials a lot. Our next one coming up is going to be by Karen, ways to recycle, when to bin and when not to bin. So really talking about what goes in our our recycling bins at the curbside and what's recyclable, but maybe not in the curbside, but perhaps somewhere else in the community. She's going to help us to be better recyclers on November 10th. And then I'll be back with you all talking about some holiday tips, ways to waste less during the holiday season. That's December 8th coming up. You can already pre-register for those if you want. They're available on the website. And with that, if I didn't answer your questions, let's take questions now. I'm leaving with you with two resources. We do have a compost site page on our website at marathoncountysolidwaste.org. And recyclingconnections.org has a whole section on composting. So really good tips and resources available to you. You can always email me directly for questions. So what questions do you have and what are you still wondering about that I can help with? Karen, were there any questions that came in? I didn't follow it as well here.
I think you've addressed them along the way, and I've added some comments too. Nothing that, oh, here, what about the spring? What do you do with the heap of partially composted material? Put it back in the bin you had emptied in the fall?
Do you do with a heap of partially composted? Yeah, so I'll just, if it's not fully composted come spring, I'll have whatever is finished, I actually will put on my garden, even if it's partially finished. I don't start gardening really. I'm not going to plant anything in my garden typically until May, late May, first week in June maybe. So come spring when it's that April time, I'm already opening up my compost bin, seeing what's happening, getting them turned. That's where I look at the moisture levels. If I want to leave the lid off, if it's really dried out from the winter, I'll do that. If it was really wet and I need to add more browns to it, I start doing that. If there's some things that are just not fully composted yet, or they're not going to compost in the next month before I actually start planting something, then those go into the next heap or to the compost bin. You're exactly right. I just put it back in and let that, give it more time to break down. Would any of your advice change for someone who uses composting toilet regarding winter prep specifically? Well, again, if you're using a composting toilet, I really would, you'd want to know how you're going to use the finished compost. How is that going to be spread? That's going to determine it. And if you do use that, you need to know the amount per month. So just like you would use for your, where we talked about do a baseline assessment on how much material you're putting in your bin. You will need that much more material emptied in a bin in your backyard, getting ready to add that all winter long. You have to remember, composting pretty much slows down or stops entirely for about 4 months in Wisconsin. you're not going to have that stuff breaking down. And if you keep adding it from the composting toilet, from your food scraps, I have a chicken coop, it's a lot of material. I know the 2 bins, 1.5 bins are going to be plenty for me, but for you, you might need a little bit more. So take a week's assessment of how much material that is that will be added to your backyard. And do remember how you're going to use the final product to make sure that you're getting the pile heated up hot enough to kill any bacteria, especially E. coli levels and things like that. There's a lot of bacteria that will die at a certain point, but that pile has to get a good 160 degrees for 3 days straight in order to kill off any negative bacteria for you. Does that help? I hope, Nicole. I hope so. Is it helpful to shred leaves rather than use them unshredded? Yeah, some people like to take what do they call those, trimmers? And they will actually take the trimmer, put it down into their bin and cut those leaves up a little tighter. What that also is going to do is probably save you a little more space in those bins. So if you do chop up the leaves a little bit more, that would be helpful for you if you're trying to clear out even a little bit more space. So again, I mean, you saw how my wire bins, if I chopped them up, then they're really not going to hold in those bins. But some people do, and it's really about how much space you have really for that. I like the bin, the whole leaves work for me, and I don't have a trimmer to really cut them up really good for that. So yeah, it's not bad. Not a bad idea to do. Oh yeah, a mention of airflow. I see that, Karen, that you had said. Yeah, if they're too small, you're not gonna. They're gonna get really dense there and tough to fluff, if you will. Might freeze hard on there. Any other questions? Well, I will be here a little bit just to hang out to see if anyone wanted to stay a little bit longer to ask any direct questions. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll join us on the other presentations in the series. Do email me if you have any questions or something comes up. I love talking compost, and I am here to help you navigate your composting world too. Thanks, Wendy, for the applause and the thumbs up.